All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're just giving everyone a few minutes to log on here, but we're so excited to be back with our work wells. We know it's been a while, so we're super excited to kick off with this great topic that we have today. For today, we're going to be talking about mental wellness in the workplace with our friends from Cigna. Thank you so much for being here. And Joaquin, we're ready to go to the next slide, please. So for today, our guest speaker is Laura Magnuson from Cigna. We're going to be introducing her a little bit more in just a few minutes, but she will take us through a presentation on mental wellness in the workplace. Then we'll have some time for some Q&A at the end, and we'll share some updates about what's coming up for Wellness A to Z, and we'll close out. Next slide, please. But before anything, we just want to say thank you to our Wellness A to Z sponsors. Without your support, we wouldn't be able to do Wellness A to Z. So thank you, BBVA, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Arizona, Cigna, and Delta Dental. Next slide. And thank you to our sponsor for this workwell, Ideas Collide. They sponsored this workwell webinar, so thank you so much. And we are so happy to have you on our steering committee. All right, so some new announcements for Wellness A to Z. We have two new Wellness A to Z employers who have joined us recently, and they are Y Scouts. So Y Scouts, if you're on here, welcome to Wellness A to Z and Northern Trust. Thank you for joining us. We're so excited to have you. We are also bringing back our Play Well workshop series. If you were able to attend some of those were our workshop series that was really focused on movement. So getting up and doing some exercises, doing short workouts. And we did that collaboration with Team Up AZ. And we're so excited to bring that back again this fall. We're going to have it in October. And we're changing the layout a little bit to that one. So it's going to be more interactive. Instead of being in a webinar format, it's actually going to be in a meeting format so that we can see each other, we can talk to each other, and really just engage and connect. So that is coming up. And then we're also launching a Wellness A to Z networking event session. It's going to be virtual for now, but that's also going to be in October. We really just want to provide a platform for all of our Wellness A to Z employers to reconnect again and to connect with other businesses and organizations in the community on health and wellness topics and how it's been affecting our workplaces. And then lastly, Wellness A to Z does have a LinkedIn. So if you are on LinkedIn, please follow us. We're just Wellness A to Z on LinkedIn. All right, thank you, Joaquin. Next slide. Perfect. And in addition to LinkedIn, we also have our other social networks. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can find wellness tips on there that we post often, information about our upcoming events, and just a great way to keep updated with what's going on with Wellness A to Z, who our employers are, and who's connected to us. So give us a follow if you are on those outlets as well. Next slide, please. And our Wellness A to Z employers, we just love to recognize all of you and thank you for being a part of our community. So these are our platinum level employers. And then next slide, please. And then here we have our gold level and silver level employers. Thank you so much for being a part of Wellness A to Z. All right, and if you are new here today and joining us for the webinar to learn more about today's topic, and you're interested about learning more about Wellness A to Z, please feel free to reach out to me. I would love to schedule a touch base with you. Wellness A to Z has a lot of great things to offer, and we are completely complimentary. So some of the things that we offer are resources, toolkits that can help you either add to your current wellness program at work, or to create one from scratch. It's super simple, and we're really here to just help you with that. Also, networking is a key part of Wellness A to Z, as well as company recognition and attracting talent to your organization. Next slide, please. Okay, and with that, I'm so excited to introduce our speaker, Laura Magnuson, who is a behavioral clinical account manager with Cigna and a licensed therapist. So let me share a little bit more about Laura as we get started here. So she is the behavior clinical account manager for Cigna, and her role, she acts as a subject matter expert to the Cigna sales team and serves as a proactive member of assigned client account teams working to support new business managers, client managers, and market leadership within the sales organization. She possesses an in-depth knowledge of advanced market issues and Cigna's suite of behavioral products, services, and capabilities. She partners with behavioral operations to maintain a working knowledge of all clinical healthcare partners and operational processes necessary to support clients and sales teams. She is also a mental health first aid trainer. She is passionate about educating others about mental health. Laura has been actively involved with the first responder initiatives at Cigna, which includes holding roundtables in various markets and assisting departments in getting mental health access and resources. She is also one of the organizers of the Office Wellness Day events. She has over 15 years working in a variety of mental health settings, including inpatient psychiatric care, outpatient care, crisis, and the courts. She holds a master's in forensic psychology from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, as well as master's in marriage and family therapy from the University of Phoenix. She is an Arizona native and lives in Chandler with her husband and two children. Thank you so much, Laura. We're so excited to hear from you today, and I will go ahead and hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Melissa. So it's great to be here with you all today, and I am so excited that I get to speak with you about behavioral health because, as you just heard, that's something I'm super passionate about. And we know that this field is really kind of changing, right? The last 18 months has been so tumultuous. We've kind of been on this roller coaster, if you will, of emotions. And right when we thought that maybe things were getting better in the land of COVID, we've had different variants that have come forward. So, it really has been kind of this up and down, and it's really impacted our emotions in a variety of different ways. Next slide, please. So I am just going to kind of start broadly and then narrow down into, maybe some practical things about how you can support your employees in the workspace, things that you can do for yourself, and then, of course, provide some resources as well. Next slide, please. So just to kind of give you some information, we're starting to get different pieces from a variety of different sources about how this pandemic has really impacted us. And so just to kind of highlight here, we have that 26% of adults say that pandemic-related stress makes them less productive. 42% experienced an average weight gain of 29 pounds. And 1 in 5 are hesitant to return to an office environment. But really, this is our opportunity, right, to try to turn the situation into the best that we can. And so I'm going to provide a few tips here on how we do that. Next slide, please. So in early 2021, The Economist conducted a new independent study that was commissioned by Cigna to really examine the role and impact of employee well-being across the U.S. And they asked 600 executives and 1,200 employees across 6 different sectors, which included hospitality, financial services, manufacturing, retail, healthcare, and technology. And they asked them about the role of employers in driving well-being, productivity, business success, and economic vitality. And so the next couple snippets here I'm going to share with you come from that research piece. I'm happy to share with you that entire link to the site so you can read the entire piece about wellness and what we're seeing from employees as well as executives. But I thought it was really telling just to point out a few pieces that were found from that survey. And so what you can see here is that fatigue, stress, and burnout were the top factor impacting business growth, according to the respondents' opinion, right? And if we kind of take a deeper dive into that, we're seeing that there are certain fields right, that are saying that that is even more of a factor. So if we look at healthcare, right, they're saying 58% are reporting that this is the top factor impacting business growth. And then you can see elevated numbers in financial services, retail and consumer goods as well. The second was lack of positive attitude. And the third was lack of skilled talent, or that it's hard to recruit employees. Next slide, please. The drum roll here, right? So also want to call out one of the findings from this study is that the respondents were asked, what kind of benefits are important to you, right? What do you feel that's critical to employee performance? And so as you can see on your screen here, broken down kind of where mental and emotional health coverage fits in, right? And you can see that kind of in the middle of the screen, the one that's highlighted there. But interesting to note that there were certain groups that found it more critical, right? So healthcare again, as well as technology and telecommunications, and then financial and retail were higher than the overall trend. And also interesting to note, right, that employees found it more important than senior executives, those benefits, as well as remote workers ranked it higher. And generally speaking, women were just slightly more likely to value that benefit than men were. Next slide. So some strategies that were put forth from this study really looked at the totality of our workforce health. So just some suggestions here is to focus on well care versus sick care, right? So, you know, what does that look like? Oftentimes we have sick time that we're able to take. I would ask if you have mental health days that you're able to take as well. But what does that look like? What are we doing to be preventative when it comes to care? And what is your culture in the workspace related to well-being? Do you have supportive policies? Is leadership out, you know, really leading the charge in this arena? Because we know that culture oftentimes can start at the top. Also, physical and mental health, and that's really what I'm going to dive into here more today. So more to come on that piece. A flexible and agile approach in the workplace has also been found to be beneficial, right? And how flexible can we be, right? We know that employees oftentimes have different needs, especially as we talk about maybe returning to work. You know, there's definitely mixed emotions when it comes to this topic. And are you able to be flexible in your approach? You know, are you asking employees for their input as well when it comes to what's going to make our workplace a better environment? You know, how can I show that I value you? And then after you ask those questions, making sure that you're following up, right? Because that seems to be the biggest area where employers are dropping the ball. They ask all of the questions, but then they don't report back to the employees what exactly they're doing with that information. What changes have they made? How have they conveyed that they have heard their employees' requests and that they're responding, right? And then the last piece here is to vet innovative solutions. So, you know, this is really kind of a technology explosion, if you will, and that's really what we're seeing in the behavioral space as well. But what are we doing to make sure that we have this right balance of utilization of technology? And are there ways that we can make our day more efficient, but still maintain that work-life balance, right? So that we don't have to feel like we're always on. Next slide, please. So I just want to now kind of spend some time and dive a little bit deeper when we talk about what we're seeing in the mental health landscape, right? So there's a variety of different studies that have now shown really the emotional toll that the last 18 months has taken. And so here are some statistics that you can see on the screen, right? We're seeing an increase in symptoms of depression. We're seeing an increase in feelings of loneliness. We're seeing an increase in those that have symptoms of anxiety. But the statistic that I think is the most kind of eye-opening, especially as a therapist, is that twice as many people in 2020 said they considered suicide than did in 2018, right? So that tells us that we have a large group of individuals that are in this crisis moment or very close to. And so it's so critical to be aware of the resources as well as to communicate those, right? Because oftentimes, you know, there are individuals within employer groups that know all of the resources, but do all of your employees really know what they are? Do they know who to turn to when they need help, right? You know, EAP is a great resource as well, so making sure that you're making that communicated. And then also just to let you know, many carriers have different resource or call-in lines. At Cigna, we're available 24 hours a day to take calls, and they're not just answered by somebody who's going to take down a name and number at 2 in the morning and give you a call back. These are licensed clinicians that are able to, you know, listen to what's going on, assess and triage, and get that individual connected to the right level of care. So just really important that you're aware of all of those different resources available at your fingertips. Next slide, please. So we know that it's been, you know, really unprecedented times. And so often there are many questions when we talk about maybe returning to work or different pieces related to the workplace and our personal life. Oftentimes employees, you know, they have all these questions, these anxieties that are happening. You know, they're thinking about, what's my workday going to look like now? Is it safe to go back? What do all of those preventative health measures look like? Am I going to need to allow more time, right, when I get there for any kind of screening metrics? Are vaccines required? And if they're not, how do I know that others are being safe, right? Others might be thinking, you know, I really liked working from home and I'm not looking forward to returning to the office. And so there might be, you know, some reluctance to returning. And then also, you know, we're also balancing so many different balls in the air, right? So if we have kids, if they're going to school, right, they've kind of been ping-ponged back and forth. And so we might be thinking, you know, or worrying about how long is it going to take for my kids to get used to this new routine? You know, the mask mandate has really been all over the board, back and forth and debated. And so, you know, our kids might be a little bit confused about what are even their expectations, right? So really important just to be aware of all of the different challenges that might be happening, especially if you're managing a team, right? Next slide, please. So as we talk about, you know, some of these emotional reactions, I've kind of referred to this as the emotional roller coaster. And we know that, you know, different individuals have experienced different things in the last 18 months. So of course, it's typical that we're going to have employees or even ourselves, our family and friends, our emotions might be all over the board, and that's okay, right? But some things that we might need to be considerate of is that maybe some individuals are really worried about certain health decisions or what's happening in the workplace. You know, some of us have anxiety over what's to come. We feel like we don't have control of the situation. And so that, you know, really can drive up those feelings of anxiety. Many of us might be fatigued, right? You know, I've heard from several of my colleagues that we're working longer hours from working from home. Sometimes it's hard to have that boundary, that start and stop. Things are kind of bleeding over, right, as far as schedules go, which can lead to that exhaustion. You know, we might be feeling grief. So many individuals have lost loved ones during this time. And even if they haven't, they can still be having this feeling of grief for maybe events that they weren't able to experience. Maybe they're grieving what's going to happen in the future, right? They're just not so sure about getting excited about anything because they don't know what the future holds. So that grieving process can also be draining, can really be kind of an up and down roller coaster feeling as well. And, there might be some disappointment if individuals are starting to return to the workplace as well. And others might be really excited, right? It might be too much to be working from home. They might really miss that in-person interaction piece. So again, it's really typical to have these emotions that are kind of all over the board. And it's also typical to have them vary from day to day, right? Next slide. So as we think about if you're in a managerial role, right, how can we be supportive to our workplace, to our employees? We're having these conversations, and individuals are talking about what's being termed as the Great Resignation right now, where it's predicted that many individuals will be leaving their current employer. So it's just really crucial that as managers, we're aware of what we can do to support our employees, right? Because oftentimes if individuals feel valued, if they feel supported, that might prevent them from going elsewhere. So some things to consider is to address what are the unknowns, right? It's okay as a manager to say, these are the pieces that I'm not aware of right now. I'll give you all of the information as it becomes available to myself. We want to make sure that we're using empathy when we're listening to our employees, right? So sometimes it's better to just be present with them in the moment and not constantly being directive, right? So taking that time to really listen, checking in on our employees on a regular basis, seeing how they're doing, and not just in their professional life, but in their personal life as well, right? So, just asking those simple questions, how are you doing? How are you and your family handling this tumultuous time? And then also being aware of some of those nonverbal cues and offering that support, right? So if somebody looks like they might be struggling, opening up some of that dialogue and letting them know, I'm here to support you and help you. I have resources available, reminding them what they are, right? And so, as a manager, lots of things to kind of keep in mind here as we continue. Maybe you've been in the workplace the entire time. Maybe you're starting to return to work, whatever that combination is. It still doesn't take away from the fact that, this has been a difficult time for so many. Next slide, please. So when we talk about communication, right, it's really great to have all of the information available to you so that you're able to respond to employees' needs. So when it comes to vaccinations, what's your policy there? What about testing? What about if I do end up being positive with COVID-19? What does my sick leave look like? Right? All of those different pieces of information are going to be crucial to be able to communicate, right? And then the other piece is really important to be compassionate with yourself, because right now, it's been this just kind of daunting last 18 months, right? And everybody is handling this stress differently. And so recognizing that your own reactions might be different than others, and how you're responding to your employees, right, might look different. So just having some of that awareness and the ability to step back and evaluate how are things going for yourself, and then how are you able to be present for your employees. Discussing expectations, being honest about challenges and being clear with those that you're not sure, right, what the answers are, but letting them know your time frame about how they can get the answers that they might be looking for. Next slide, please. So when we talk about providing support, right, it's really looking at getting back to the basics, trying to put a sense of normalcy into whatever that you can, right? Because it's the feelings of unknown are really what kind of ramp up anxiety. The feeling of not being in control, can get you to feel very overwhelmed. And so if we're able to bring in some of that normalcy, some of having that sense of control, oftentimes we see individuals are able to be more emotionally healthy. And so we want to be responsive, but we also want to remind employees, of the resilience that they already have. So, oftentimes I ask the question, you've gone through challenging times in the past, right? And I don't need to know all of those details of what that looks like for you, but how did you get through those challenging times in the past? And is there anything that you can kind of glean from those experiences, or what kind of personal characteristics do you have that you can utilize here in this moment, right? We've done this, we've been tough before, we've bounced back, we've come back stronger. And so how can we continue to do that, right? And often the employees have those answers themselves, or even we have those answers if we're talking about ourselves. Next slide, please. All right, so, oftentimes as a manager, there's going to be many different concerns that arise. And I don't think that any of those concerns listed below in those blue boxes are anything that you haven't already been faced with or continue to handle on a day-to-day basis, right? But how do we be sensitive when these things come up? Well, oftentimes individuals are aware of what they need to be successful. They know what they need to feel supported. So even just asking that question, right, as a manager, I want to support you. What is it that you need in this moment, and how can I help, right? And if there's any way that you can be flexible or adjust some of those expectations during these challenging times to help your employees be successful, that's just going to be so beneficial for them in the long run, not just the short run as well, right? So as we talk about employee retention, they're going to remember, you know what, I was really struggling with some of my childcare issues. I was able to modify my schedule. And so some of those loyalties, right, might be starting to build. And so, if at any point, as we talk about, again, that great resignation, maybe that's going to be something that's going to have them thinking twice about looking elsewhere for a different position. Again, of course, always having those resources available. And if somebody doesn't want to talk to you, if they don't want to open up, that doesn't mean that we stop and don't give the resources, right? We can let them know, I'm here for you when you're ready to talk. I always want to see how I can help. But I want to remind you that you have your EAP resources that are free to yourself and anybody in the household, right? And here's the phone number, or here's the website, right? So it's really just that expressing concern, being available, right, and opening up that door that's really going to be beneficial. Next slide, please. So what are the signs of distress, right? How do I know when myself, an employee, a friend, a family member might be struggling? Well, oftentimes we want to look for some kind of change in behavior. So if we're talking about employees, right, maybe it is you used to have a very stellar employee, right, your superstar, if you will, and maybe they start to show up late. Maybe they start to, miss some deadlines. They seem like they just don't have the same level of energy. Those would be, some of those signs that would indicate to us, I think I need to check in on this person and have a conversation with them and ask them what's going on, right? What are their barriers to being successful right now, and how can I help, right? And it's challenging in this time of this virtual world to really be able to see some of these signs. And so that's why I say it's even more critical to be checking in on our employees, even if they're not showing any of these signs of distress, right? Having those regular check-in periods and asking them how they're doing. Next slide, please. All right, so as human resource professionals, if there's any of you in this group, again, I don't think that these topics are anything that are earth-shattering that you haven't thought about, but you definitely are feeling some stress and anxiety, right? You're being pelted with information left and right. Things continue to change. And so trying to stay on top of everything, trying to make sure that your that you're responding to your employees and their needs, that alone can be really stressful, right? Feeling like a caregiver in the workspace, as well as possibly at home, can really be a lot. Many of you might be dealing with loneliness yourself, right? Maybe you're working from home and you're not able to communicate with those that you used to in those brief periods, right? Maybe there's something that comes up in the moment, and so in the workspace, maybe you talk to somebody about it, but at home, you might not have the time to pick up the phone, or there's not that passing by in the hallways, right? To kind of just share a collective sigh, if you will. So really having to be intentional about our connections. And then, of course, grief, right? And I mentioned this already before, but grief for maybe even employees that might be moving on. Maybe there were furloughs in your workplace. Just lots of different feelings related to the current state. Next slide, please. So, it's so important that as managers, as leaders, as caregivers, right, that we are taking care of ourselves and that we're getting the support that we need. There's always that example that in airplanes, right, that we need to make sure that we put our face mask on ourselves before we help somebody next to us, because we're not going to be successful if we're not caring for ourselves first, right? And so we have to remind ourselves of that. And make sure that we're taking the time that we need personally. Really making sure that we have that support network, that we have those trusted individuals that we can turn to, and that we're utilizing them as well. So maybe that's scheduling, on your calendar, regular check-in times, not with just those that you supervise, but also those that really support you as well. Next slide, please. So something that we can do to try to put in place, a daily plan related to managing our stress is look at, do we have a period of time to unwind? And do we block that out on our calendar, right? That's the important piece. And selecting a time that's really going to be a time that is sacred and safe, that won't be interrupted, right? Do we have a location? Oftentimes, getting outdoors can be really healthy, getting that fresh air. Of course, we have to be cognizant of the weather, right? I think today we've got a heat advisory in place, so it might have to be at 6 a.m. if the outdoors is your place. But figuring out, where is it that I feel the most calm, that I get the most peace, right? Figuring out what's an activity to enjoy, what's something that I can do that really is beneficial to my well-being. And then a name of someone to talk to. So who do I turn to, when I start to feel overwhelmed, or even in a preventative fashion as well, right? So having this plan of, being preventative about our stress and implementing every single day is really beneficial to try to prevent things from getting so overwhelming that we get to that crisis moment that I talked to about earlier. All right, next slide. So I wanted to just share with you a little bit of information now related to video chat fatigue, because these are some questions that have come up recently, right? So as we continue, if you're continuing to work from home, or maybe you're even just obviously continuing in this video conference setting, right? Funny, I'm going to talk about fatigue as we're in the moment here. But important to note, right, that the pandemic really forced this drastic and sudden increase in the number of video conference meetings that we've had. And interesting to note, the Zoom platform went from 10 million users at the end of 2019 to more than 300 million users by May of 2020. So I don't know about you, but I really wish I would have purchased stock in Zoom prior to the pandemic. I might be looking forward to retirement if that were the case. But what we have found is that there's, 4 main concerns identified with video chat fatigue and the way so many of us have been accustomed to working. And so while this information is based on academic theory and research, there is some ways that we can implement these pieces into our daily work schedule. So just to share with you. And also want to highlight that really, being able to utilize video conferencing has been positive as well. So I know that I'm going to kind of talk about this fatigue piece, but also want to make sure that I'm calling out that it has, reduced energy consumption by 10%, right? This taking away this commuting piece. It might be giving us more time in our day. Oftentimes we're not getting ready the same way that we used to if we're going into an office setting. But, even with all of these additional pieces, we feel fatigued at the end of the day, right? And so the first reason for this is because of the intense up-close eye contact. And so we also call this the nonverbal overload. And so, kind of if you think about it, if you're standing in an elevator with several other people, you likely look down or away and not directly at others because it violates the social norm and it feels awkward, right? But that's what we're doing in these video chats. Second, watching yourself on the screen in real time is exhausting, and actually it's pretty distracting as well. Third, being on camera means sitting in one place for an extended period of time. And then the last piece here is cognitive overload and really how it has increased during video chat. Next slide, please. All right, so during in-person meetings, we generally don't stare at the speaker the entire time, right? There might be some other things that we're doing. Maybe we're doodling, maybe we're looking at other people in the meeting, right? And so this can feel really intense if we're on this video chat and looking at one person and feeling like we have to maintain eye contact the entire time, right? Also, there are some pieces related to the size of the screen, as well as, how close up you are with someone. Even if we're in a face-to-face meeting, right, we might not be as close to that person as they appear on screen. And so that can be draining in and of itself, right? And so sometimes some things that might be beneficial is to take that presentation out of that full screen mode and reduce the size of the window, which gives you a little bit more space, right? So that it's not so up close and personal there. All right, next slide, please. So seeing yourself during video chat is really fatiguing, right? It would be like if I carried a mirror around everywhere I went and was constantly, being aware of what I look like, right? An interesting study found last June that 49% of those who had not had plastic surgery before said they were open to cosmetic or reconstructive treatment in the near future. And also a piece that might be adding to this is that when we are wearing our face masks now, they can temporarily cover up some of the bruising that you might experience, right, with maybe some of that plastic surgery. So, this constant mirror piece of being aware of what we look like, it's just draining. So that can really add to that feeling of fatigue as well. Next slide, please. So mobility, right? We talked about the number of individuals that have reported that they gained weight and they didn't want to. And so, having to be on video and being, stable in this one position here can really, of course, reduce mobility. Oftentimes, people feel like they benefit from moving around, right? But if you're scheduled back to back in these video meetings, then of course, it's going to be draining on you as well. So if you're able to turn off your camera, for example, on certain meetings, or I've also heard of companies that have no video meeting days. So Like Fridays, we're not having any kind of video day, right? It takes some of that stress off of feeling like you have to be present the entire time. And so maybe if you're able to even turn your camera so it's a side view instead of full on front view, maybe you can turn your camera so that you're not seeing how you look yourselves, you're just seeing the other individuals. That can help. And maybe if you have an environment that you're able, right, to stand up and stretch or turn your video off if you're not the one that's speaking, and maybe pace around or doodle, right? That can assist as well in some of these feelings of fatigue. Next slide, please. So the last piece is that our cognitive load is much higher during video chat. And so, this happens because in person, we're not being calculated about our nonverbal behavior, right? It's a non-conscious effort. But when we're on video, right, we have to work really hard to send some of these signals, send some of these clues that we're listening, right? And so we might be over-exaggerated. There's also a study that showed that people's voices tend to be 15% louder when they're on a video chat. And I can share that, when my entire family was home, I could hear my husband speaking from 3 rooms away. And I thought, gosh, I really hope you don't speak that loud in person. That's overwhelming, right? And so, that also can be draining itself. So some things just to keep in mind, maybe giving yourself an audio only break might be beneficial. But feeling like you have to constantly cue in can cognitively be draining as well. Next slide, please. So again, kind of just to mention here, as we talk about if you're continuing to utilize video conferencing, regardless of what the future kind of holds, I think there is this culture shift, right, and how we are going to continue to work. There's also some different studies that are showing that whenever this new normal of returning to, that business travel is still going to be decreased, right, by about 20%. And that's coming from McKinsey and Company from February of 21 in their study. And so, the video platform is probably going to be here for a while. So just some things to keep in mind so that we can kind of monitor ourselves and try to avoid some of this fatigue. Yeah. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to share with you a couple different resources. And so the first being, at Cigna, we have a variety of different digital providers that are now part of our network. So whether you have Cigna insurance or you don't, right, it's really a great reminder to be aware of these new digital technologies that are available in the behavioral space. At Cigna, what we're seeing is an increase of virtual utilization. So across our book of business, we're now at about 60% of our behavioral health utilization is being completed virtually. And that's in a variety of different ways. As a therapist, I think that this is really the silver lining of the pandemic, right? I think that we're talking about behavioral health more. I think that we're getting folks connected to care in different ways that maybe they wouldn't have connected before. So, Talkspace is a provider that you can text with a therapist. Ginger is a provider you can start with a behavioral health coach. Whatever the resources are available to you, I just really encourage you to become aware of them and then make sure that you continue to push them out, right, across your employees, because oftentimes, we might say, yeah, I don't need that now, and then forget about it. But then when we do need it, it might be more challenging to find. And so those regular reminders can really be beneficial. Next slide, please. Also wanted to share this resource with you as well, as we talk about the concept of resilience, and that's not something I'm going to dive deep into today. But if you go to cignaresilience.com, you do not have to have any type of Cigna coverage in order to access this website. But you can start by reading a white paper about resilience. about kind of how our levels of resilience ebb and flow throughout our lifespan, kind of where we're at now and how can we continue to build on our levels of resilience, right? This is what we need now to really flourish in these challenging times. But at this website, there are also a variety of different tools. So there are guided meditation. There are different pieces that you can read about, different podcasts. I know that we also have a return to school, a back to school topic there as well, with a variety of different resources. So, you know, there are, regardless of who your provider is, there's a variety of different resources available at our fingertips. And maybe part of your calendaring of your day is making sure that you're familiar with them, right? But definitely encourage you to check out this website. Again, just a variety of tools that you can share as well. Next slide, please. And then lastly, you know, I started out by talking about how, you know, many individuals are in this crisis moment or might get to the crisis moment. So, you know, it's always great to have a resource available that can help anyone, anywhere, nationally, right? So what you see listed in that blue box is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. What I'd encourage you to do, if you haven't already, is to program this number into your cell phone. You know, hopefully you don't need this number, but this is something that anybody can utilize, again, regardless of whatever insurance coverage they might have. And, you know, you can call this number just not when somebody's in crisis, but you can also call this number when you're not sure what to do, when you're not sure how to have a conversation with someone, right? So really a great resource to have available. And then also the texting crisis line. So oftentimes individuals feel more comfortable with texting as opposed to making that phone call, or maybe they're even in an environment where they're not able to speak freely, but they're able to text, right? So this crisis text line is also a great resource to have. It's 741-741. And what's going to happen with both of these resources is they'll connect you to whatever your most local crisis lines are available. So for those of you that live in Maricopa County, right, just want to remind you that we have Crisis Response Network that just recently rebranded. They're now Solari, but they also have resources available in our community to send out mobile teams. So those are behavioral health folks that can actually come to you, right, and assist with that crisis moment. So if somebody might be feeling suicidal, you're not sure what to do, those individuals can come to you, can assess the situation, and then get that individual connected to care. Also want to call out that Cigna has a veteran support line. Again, you don't have to be a Cigna member to utilize this resource. It is available 24 hours a day. You can see it listed there on the screen, that 800 number. There's also a weekly guided meditation available through this resource as well. So again, so many different resources available. You know, behavioral health is something that we're talking about. We just have seen how it's impacted, you know, even on the global scale, right, with the Olympics. We have Simone Biles bringing mental health up to the forefront. So this isn't, you know, something that's only impacting certain groups. And it's really an exciting time to try to get these resources and get individuals connected to care as early as possible, because we know the outcomes are going to be so much better if we can intervene early. All right, so with that being said, I think I've just talked for an awfully long time. And I think at this point, Melissa, we have some time for questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Laura. I'm trying to get my video back on here. Perfect. Thank you so much. That was a really great presentation. I know it was very helpful to me and hopefully to everyone who was able to join us today. And kind of as we were talking about this last slide, I have a question here for you. How can we, or like, what are some warning signs or triggers that we should be aware of to look for in our team members to know how to best support them if we see maybe their mental health is declining or they need some help, support.
Sure, sure. So I think that the biggest thing is behavior change, right? And that's regardless of if they're an employee, if they're a family member, if they're a friend, right? Behavior change is really kind of the sign that will alert us that there's something going on with that individual. And, you know, it's really challenging because so many folks are stressed out right now. And so that's why I say, you know, we have to just continually check in on everyone and have that conversation. Hey, how are you doing? What are you doing to care for yourself? Is there any way that you need additional support, right? Because oftentimes, you know, it's the strong individuals that are just kind of going through things. They might have a smile on their face, but underneath, they might really be struggling. So those signs that we're looking for that somebody might be struggling, they can look different, right? But it's that behavior change piece is really what's going to be a strong indicator that there's something going on, right? And so that's where we want to start. So if, you know, sleep is starting to change, if their physical presence, the way they appear is starting to change, maybe they start to, you know, look a little bit like exhausted, right? Maybe they're not dressing the same way. They're not, you know, taking care of their hygiene the way that they used to. Maybe they're eating differently, right? So maybe they're eating more, eating less. They seem maybe a little withdrawn, right? More than they used to. These are all indicators to open the door to the conversation, right? Hey, what's going on? How are you doing? I noticed that you just haven't seemed yourself lately, or at least how you used to be. You know, opening up the conversation because maybe they're doing okay, right? Maybe they just have a new baby at home and they're not getting any sleep, right? So figuring out, you know, kind of what's going on with those individuals is really going to be key. And so, you know, my consistent message is making sure that you're just checking in on everybody, right?
I love that.
And especially, yeah, in the virtual world where we might not be able to see some of these changes happening.
I love that. Thank you, Laura. That was very helpful. And kind of on that note of just normalizing this conversation and topic of mental wellness and mental health, um, a lot of our audience are wellness coordinators, HR. What would you say is the best way to normalize this in our workplaces with our different leadership and with our teams to begin the conversation and make it normal?
Yeah, I think it's about, so you mentioned a couple things, but starting with leadership, right? Having that top-down support of these conversations, you know, starting whatever kind of meeting that you might be having with checking in and asking how individuals are doing, scheduling those one-on-one meetings, right? And I know that during the pandemic, even my own supervisor, the frequency of those meetings increased. And also the content of those conversations changed. Now I would say that half of our conversation is really about how are both of us doing, right? And what are we doing to try to cope with some of our stressors, right? I know my supervisor, she knows the things that I'm stressed out about now, right? Kids just went back to school, right? We've got kids testing positive for COVID in the classrooms. She's aware of my stressors and continues to check in with me. Hey, how's it going? What's new with your kids? Have they adjusted back to their routine, right? And we know that those stressors are going to change through time. So I think just really knowing your employees is so valuable and critical right now, and making the time to do that and making it a priority, and getting that buy-in from leadership that is a priority to have those regular check-ins and have them be a scheduled part of your day.
I love that. Thank you. I have a few other questions here for you, and you talked about it at the beginning of your slides. Kind of looking at the bigger picture overall, how have you seen that COVID-19 has impacted mental health and how that kind of relates to the workplace and our not effectiveness, our productivity in the workplace?
Yeah, so interesting, and I can share out that resource. But looking at in this study, right, that I mentioned at the beginning, related to the Economist is the name of that study. Some of the factors that they looked at were how employees feel versus how executives feel. And it was fascinating to me to see the difference. And one of the questions was related to motivation. Do you feel motivated in the workplace? Yeah. And only 26% of employees reported feeling motivated, right? Wow. And so, I think that obviously that lack of motivation is definitely going to have a pull on things like presenteeism, right? And how are we really appearing in the workforce? How are we moving forward and being productive? And so absolutely all of everything that we've been experiencing over the last 18 months has really contributed to that. But I also think, trying to normalize that it's okay if you're not feeling motivated every day, right? And those are conversations that even I've had with my teammates about, what are you guys doing? And do you feel motivated right now? And, that fatigue is real, right? Yeah. And so to say, it's okay if you don't feel motivated every single day at every moment, right? And what are we doing in those moments to support each other? So there's definitely this impact that we're seeing related to stress, related to fatigue, that work-life balance. And it's really going to be interesting, I think, in the next year to see these predictive statistics related to this great resignation, right? It seems to be that many individuals are really looking at and evaluating their work-life balance. And they're making changes that maybe they wouldn't have made prior to the pandemic, right? They're looking at what's important to them. So I think that we do have just this huge shift that is coming. And I've heard it from different employer groups as well, that their employees are starting to be more rigid with their boundaries as far as personal life and professional. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, right? Making sure that we're taking care of ourselves.
That's so important, Laura. I really love that point. And I know I got a lot of takeaways from this and excited to implement them myself at work. And so thank you so much for all the information that you provided. I know that somebody put in a comment here that I wanted to read to you. It says, excellent presentation, valuable information. I plan to continuously check in on my teams. Thank you. And then we had someone else say, it's validating to know why we feel so fatigued. So yes, I think this presentation provided not only a lot of information, but validation for a lot of us who might be experiencing this. So thank you so much. Are there any closing things that you would like to share, or if people want to connect with you, is there any way they can connect with you?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to share my email, right? It's just laura.magnuson@cigna.com. And I can also share out that Economist study as well. There's a lot of information that is available there, and I just touched on the mental health surface pieces. So it's really fascinating to look at, and we'll continue to, probably validate and kind of guide kind of future steps in the workplace. But I appreciate your time. I'm so happy that time was given related to mental health. And I love the takeaway of checking in on everybody, right? Even those people that you think have it all together. So important. So yes, thank you all so much. Just so appreciative.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you. All right, Joaquin, can we please go to the next slide? I think one more and then. One more. Perfect. All right. So, as far as our upcoming events, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. We have our Play Well workshop coming up October 28th with Team Up AZ. That one's going to be a fun, interactive workshop where we're going to get moving and actually apply some of the things we talked about today with Laura, of just kind of taking that break from being in front of our computer and sitting and actually get up and move and stretch. And so, really excited for that one. We hope you could join us, as well as our networking session following that at 4:45 p.m. and our next Work Well webinar, which will be in November. So we hope to see you there. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Joaquin. And thank you to our sponsors for making today possible. Have a great day. Bye.